My friend, you're about to do something small. Maybe it's opening a document you've been avoiding. Maybe it's sending a message you've rewritten 4 times. Maybe it's walking out of a room that no longer feels like yours. Maybe it's simply saying the sentence that has been sitting in your throat for weeks. Your hand pauses, not dramatically, just for half a second longer than it needs to. Your eyes flick to the side, your shoulders drop a millimeter. Something in your chest tightens the way it always does right before you decide whether you are allowed. You wait. You wait for a feeling of certainty. You wait for the internal green light. You wait for the quiet sense that someone, somewhere has already approved this. And when it doesn't come, you do what you've always done, you put it down. You've been here before, not in this exact room, not with this exact document or message or sentence, but in this exact feeling, the almost starting, the soft retreat, the quiet decision that now is not the right time. It has become so familiar that it almost feels responsible. You tell yourself you are being careful. You tell yourself you are being thoughtful. You tell yourself you are waiting until you are ready, but readiness has a strange habit of never fully arriving when you need external permission to feel it. So you stay in the loop. The loop is quiet. It doesn't scream, it just waits with you. It looks like this. You have an impulse, something small and true moves inside you. A desire, a boundary, a beginning and ending, and then, almost immediately, another part of you steps forward. It asks for permission. Not out loud. Never out loud. It just checks. Is this allowed? Is this too much? Will this make someone uncomfortable? Am I allowed to want this yet? Have I earned the right to start? You look around the room even when no one is there. You look for a sign. You look for the feeling that the world has already said yes. And when the world stays silent, you interpret the silence as not yet. So you wait. You wait while the document stays closed. You wait while the message sits in drafts. You wait while the conversation you need to have becomes another week older. You wait while the version of you who wanted more becomes quieter and quieter until wanting itself starts to feel selfish. The waiting is polite. It never raises its voice. It just becomes the water you swim in. And slowly, without you noticing the exact moment it happened, the waiting became more familiar than the wanting. You start to live in the almost starting, almost speaking, almost leaving, almost creating, almost resting without guilt, almost taking up the full shape of what you actually are. You become excellent at preparation, excellent at considering, excellent at imagining how it might go if someone finally gave you the signal. But the signal never comes from outside. And the longer you wait for it, the more the waiting itself starts to feel like safety, because as long as you haven't started, you cannot fail. As long as you haven't spoken, no one can disagree. As long as you haven't claimed the space, no one can tell you it was never yours. The cost is quiet. It doesn't arrive as a crisis, it arrives as a soft flattening. You notice it most clearly in the ordinary moments, the way you hesitate before ordering what you actually want at a restaurant, the way you soften your opinion in a group conversation so it doesn't take too much space, the way you wait for someone else to suggest the thing you already know you need, the way you keep a desire private for months because saying it out loud would make it real enough to require action. These are not dramatic acts of self-abandonment. They are small, almost invisible negotiations with your own aliveness. And each one teaches your nervous system the same quiet lesson. Your wanting is conditional. It is only allowed if it doesn't disturb the water. It is only allowed if it arrives already approved. It is only allowed if it can be made small enough to fit inside someone else's comfort. Over time, that lesson becomes automatic. You stop even noticing the negotiation. You just edit. You edit your desires before they fully form. You edit your sentences before they leave your mouth. You edit your plans before they become commitments. You edit your rest before you take it. And the person who does the editing is not some cruel inner critic. It is the part of you that learned early that love and belonging sometimes required you to stay slightly smaller than you are. So you kept the parts of yourself that might be too much carefully folded. You waited for the day when those parts would feel safe enough to come out without needing permission. But that day never arrives on its own. Because the feeling of safety you are waiting for is not something the outside world can give you in the way you are hoping. It is something that only appears after you have already begun moving without it. The dream doesn't disappear. It just becomes distant enough to stop hurting every day. The desire doesn't die. It just learns to whisper so quietly that you can almost pretend you never heard it. At some point, avoidance stopped feeling temporary. It started feeling like the way you move through the world. You still call it carefulness. You still call it timing. You still call it waiting for the right moment. But the right moment has a habit of looking exactly like the moment you decide you no longer need someone else to open the door first. This is the part you don't usually say out loud. You've been treating your own life like a place you need an invitation to enter. You've been waiting for permission to want what you want, to need what you need, to leave what no longer holds you, to begin what has been waiting for you longer than you've been waiting for the green light. And the frightening thing is how normal this started to feel. How natural it became to check for approval before every authentic movement. How easily you learned to shrink your desires until they fit the shape of what other people could comfortably handle. How automatically you began to ask without words, "Is this okay?" Even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching, because the permission you are waiting for is not actually about other people. It is about the quiet, lifelong belief that your wanting is something that requires external validation before it is allowed to exist in full. And that belief has been running the show for a long time. It shows up in the half-second pause in the draft that never gets sent, in the document that stays closed, in the sentence that stays in your throat, in the life that stays almost. You notice it in the way your body stills when a new idea arrives, the small freeze, the quick internal scan. Will this be too much for the people around me? Will this make me hard to love? Will this require me to take up more space than I was given? You notice it when you soften your language before you speak, when you make your needs smaller so they take less room, when you wait for someone else to go first so you can follow safely behind. You notice it in the projects that stay half finished, not because you lost interest, because finishing would mean claiming them as real, and claiming them as real would mean standing behind them without a permission slip. The pattern is subtle enough that most days you don't even call it a pattern. You just call it being a good person, being considerate, being responsible, being patient. But patience, when it becomes the only way you know how to exist, stops being a virtue. It becomes a way of disappearing while still remaining visible. You stay in rooms longer than you want to. You stay in versions of yourself longer than they still fit. You stay in the almost because the almost doesn't require you to be fully seen. And the longer you stay, the more the waiting rewires you. You start to distrust your own impulses. You start to treat your desires as something that needs to be justified before they are allowed to breathe. You start to believe that wanting something strongly is somehow rude. So you wait for the world to want it for you first. You wait for someone to say, "You should do this." You wait for someone to open the door and look back at you. You wait for the external confirmation that your timing is correct. But the confirmation rarely comes in the form you are hoping for. And while you wait, something soft and important inside you begins to thin, not in a dramatic way. In the way a plant thins when it is kept in a room with just enough light to survive, but never enough to grow. You still function. You still show up. You still smile at the right times. But the part of you that used to move toward what it wanted without first asking if it was allowed, that part becomes quieter every year. Until one day you realize you have been living a carefully edited life. A life that prioritizes not disturbing anyone over fully arriving as yourself. And the cost of that editing is not loud. It is the quiet accumulation of unlived days, the conversations that never happened, the work that never got made, the boundaries that were never spoken, the rest that was never fully taken, the joy that was postponed until conditions felt safer. You didn't lose those things all at once. You lost them in the half-second pauses, in the moments you waited for permission that was never coming. So here's the turn. Not a dramatic revelation, not a sudden transformation, just a clear seeing. You've been waiting for permission that was never going to arrive from outside, because the only person who can give you permission to live as yourself is you. And you have been postponing that yes for years, not because you are weak, because the part of you that still believes you need to be allowed has been louder than the part of you that already knows you are. The permission was never missing. You just kept looking for it in the wrong direction. You kept looking at other people's faces, at other people's comfort, at other people's timelines, at the imagined reaction that might come if you finally took the full step. And while you looked outward, the life that wanted to be lived stayed quietly behind you, waiting, not angrily, just waiting. The way something true waits when it knows it cannot force itself into a body that is still asking for permission to hold it. What changes is not the size of the action. What changes is the location of the yes. You stop requiring the room to approve of your movement before you move. You stop requiring your nervous system to feel completely safe before you begin. You stop treating your own authority as something that needs to be borrowed from someone else. So what does the different choice look like? It is small. It is imperfect. It still contains the old hesitation. You open the document with the tightness still in your chest. You send the message while the internal voice is still asking if it's too much. You say the sentence while your voice is still not completely steady. You walk out of the room while part of you is still looking for someone to tell you it's okay to leave. You move while the old pattern is still running. Not because the fear has left, because you finally stop requiring the fear to leave before you are allowed to begin. That is the different choice, not the absence of resistance. The decision that resistance no longer gets to be the gatekeeper. You don't wait for the feeling of permission. You act as if you already have it. Because you do. You always did. And the quiet truth is this. The life you keep postponing is not waiting for better circumstances. It is waiting for you to stop asking if you are allowed to live it. There is no big ending here. No sudden confidence, no permanent bravery, no final moment where the need for permission disappears forever. Just a little more space, a little more room between the impulse and the automatic checking, a little more willingness to begin while the old voice is still speaking. You will still hesitate sometimes. You will still look for the green light out of habit. But now you know something you didn't know 10 minutes ago. You know that the permission you have been waiting for was never outside you. And once you see that clearly, even for a moment, something soft and irreversible begins. Not a transformation, just a quiet return to the person who no longer needs to ask. The one who is always already allowed.